Hello, everyone. This is Jerry Bolesky, Range and Forage Specialist at the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte. Today, this is the second webinar in a series on the general topic of irrigated pasture. And today we'll be talking about establishing irrigated pasture. Now, one of the first questions we often hear on this particular topic is when do we plant these cool season grasses? Well, for cool seasons, you can have a choice of two periods, that being either in the spring or the late summer seeding. With the spring seedings, we're generally talking about the March 20th to April 15th time frame there. Could be a little earlier in cases as well. Spring seeding, we're probably not going to be looking at the first grazing or haying taking place until the middle of July. In other words, it's going to be taking that long before those grasses have a fair amount of growth and establishment behind them. In those spring seedings, we often see about 50 percent of the total production of an established perennial cool season grass. One disadvantage with spring seeding is that there's likely to be some weeds annual weeds that are coming up along with those grasses. And if they are severe enough, some weed control methods may be needed. The second preferred option, I think, is this late summer seeding. So we're talking about roughly an August 10th to September 10th window there. With those late summer seedings, the objective being we have enough growth there in the fall so that by the time we go into winter, those grasses are germinated, emerged, and roughly in that 3 to 6 inch size. If they're able to reach that, by the time the growing season ends, they shouldn't have any problem whatsoever of surviving the winter and being ready to go and grow very rapidly the following spring. So those late summer seedings, the following year, oftentimes we'll see enough growth that the first grazing or haying could occur by the latter part of May. And in that year after the fall seeding, roughly you can expect about 5 to 85% the production of an cool season grass stand. For warm season grasses, I don't have a slide talking about those, but warm season grasses will pretty much limited to the spring seeding, or in some cases we can do a dormant seeding warm season grasses. But today we'll primarily focus on the cool season grasses. Just a few photo examples here, different seeding dates and what the establishing grasses look like. In this particular case here, it's a November 1st photo, but it was a cool season grass mix seeded on September 1st. The seed bed was a silage corn that had been disked. And you can see on this date by November 1st, the grasses are pretty well up and established, probably 3 to 4 inches in height, and so should be well on their way to surviving the winter quite well. Another example here of an August 31st seeding, and then this photo, that same seeding of some plots here in North Platte 33 days later, so in early October. And you can see most of the different species and entries of cool season grasses are up and growing to various degrees. Here, same plots 75 days later, so mid-November, and you can see they made considerable additional growth and are beginning their establishment quite well. This is those same photo of those same plots the following spring on May 10th, and you can see with this late summer seeding the following spring, we've got a grass height of about 10 to 14 inches already at this relatively early date in May. Here are some plots seeded on the 10th of April and what they look like on May 15th. And you can see, of course, that they have all germinated quite well and have some initial growth, but still relatively small for that mid-May date. these same plots then on July 5th, so just almost a couple of months later, you can see that they are uh, beginning to establish and grow quite well. And many of these are seeing here some orchard grass and a brome grass type of mixture, but these plots were actually hayed on the 10th of July, just 5 days after the photo. Well, with the spring seedings, we've got a few options. If in the case of we are converting some cropland into the irrigated grass, following soybeans or corn is certainly an option. If it was corn, certainly would want to check what residual corn herbicides might be there and making sure that they would not affect the cool season grasses we're trying to establish. Soybeans, they do make an ideal seed bed for season grasses. Of course, in both of these cases, interseeding could be done into older alfalfa stands, and whether we're trying to extend the life of that alfalfa stand and get some additional hay production, or if we're planning to convert it to grazing. Well, with the late summer seedings, several different possibilities here. We might have grown a crop of spring planted oats, and that oats either grazed or hayed off. That would take place by the end of June. Could then have a short fallow period before planting the full season grasses in August. Could have a summer annual forage that would have been planted late May or early June. A foxtail millet is one that works particularly well for this. So June 1st, planted foxtail millet. Roughly in 60 to 70 days, it's ready to be hayed off, and then the remaining are then after haying, the foxtail millet stubbles makes for a good seed bed for the cool season grasses. Winter wheat, of course, winter wheat's often done by the middle of July, and again, that could be used as the uh, crop before the cool season grasses. Just a couple photos here of some seeding being done into a foxtail millet stubble. And another photo here, just a closer view of what that looked like a couple of weeks after planting. See nice emergence of the grasses, and then still a nice amount of residue covering the ground, and very weed free. A wheat stubble I mentioned earlier. In some cases, we do have to watch out for excessive stubble. Nice standing stubble here, but you can also see a considerable amount of residue on the ground that may be to the point where it is a little bit excessive and could inhibit or limit the emergence of our new grass seedlings. So in the case of wheat stubble, sometimes baling off the straw after harvest may be a good practice. I've worked with a few people where we're talking about developing completely new irrigation systems on existing native grass or introduced grass pastures, particularly if those native or introduced grass pastures have been severely degraded. It can be a little bit more challenging here when it comes to the time of seeding that we use. A little checklist on this practice. Certainly, of course, some land shaping may be done ahead of time, having a good drill, and we are talking about a no-till type of seeding in this situation. But the most important thing here is killing any existing undesirable grasses and weeds that are out there. And you have to keep in mind that there will be both cool season and warm season species out there. So if we're thinking about a spring seeding, um, we might plan to go out there in, say, early to mid-April with glyphosate herbicide and do that spring at that time. But what's happening, we're probably going to get a kill on the cool season grasses, but many of the warm season species that are existing there um, may not be emerged yet, and so the herbicide would not have any effect on them. So if we want to do a spring seeding on a new situation like this, would recommend killing that existing vegetation the previous year. Now, if we're going to do a late summer seeding in this situation, we could do glyphosate in late May, and that would hopefully do a good job of removing any warm and cool season species that are out there. We could come in and plant something like foxtail millet, hay that off, and then um, plant the cool season grasses in, say, mid to late August or early September. Some people ask about cross drilling, just the practice of going in both directions with the idea that this would have a result in a more uniform distribution of the seed. And generally, this isn't needed unless we have an older type of pasture drill that may have a row spacing greater than 8 inches. If we're dealing with more conventional drills that have that 7.5, 8-inch row spacing, this practice of cross drilling really isn't necessary. Companion crops, another important question sometimes. Usually in those late summer seedings, I think if we've got everything together as far as our plan built, we're not late into the window of seeding there. Companion crop probably not necessary, even on some of the sandier soils. Sometimes in the spring we'll see the use of cover companion crops just from the standpoint again if it's a very light sandy soil. We know the grass emergence is going to be slower. But you can get in trouble with the companion crops if the seeding rate of those is too high. Here we've got some oats, and in the middle you can see emerging cool season grasses, some plus some alfalfa as well. So if we are using the cover a companion crop, be careful with the amount, and in many cases, like I suggested, it probably isn't necessary if we're doing the other things correctly. A lot of different drill types out there. Some people ask about broadcast seeding. If we are using a broadcast seeding method, a couple of the key things on that is certainly we're dealing with a much better prepared seed bed. And then after the broadcasting is done, it would still be recommended to run over it with a harrow or a cultipacker type of piece of equipment to ensure that we are creating some good seed to soil contact. The number one preference, though, would be some type of drill for the seeding. We want to make sure that we do this establishment and seeding to the best that we can, because we do have to keep in mind these are perennial grass stands, and we want to get them off to a good start, and so that they'll last a good number of years. When we deal with mixtures of grasses, of course, we can have a lot of different seed shapes and sizes and weights. If we've got a legume in there, well, again, that's a totally different type of seed. So we want to make sure that that drill is able to handle these different seed types. Making sure that the seed bed is firm is also very important. Talked a little bit about seeding rates in the earlier webinar on this irrigated pasture topic, but again, roughly, if we're again depending on the particular mixture or species that we're using, if we're in that 16 to 22 to even 25 pounds per acre rate, that's the general guideline of where we're going to be. A few other things on the seed bed preparation, soil testing. Certainly be recommended in some cases to know what we're dealing with there in terms of the fertility. I mentioned certainly earlier about checking for potential residual herbicides that we might have out there. In most cases, depending on what the soil test says, the phosphorus may be required and is important for seedling growth and initial root development of grasses. In the case of nitrogen, we want to be a little cautious with any nitrogen we apply at or shortly after seeding, particularly in the case of the spring seeding, because often a little bit extra there in terms of nitrogen may just result in a little bit more weed pressure or a weed problem. I mentioned earlier, like those firm seed beds, planting depths about 1/4 to 1/2 inch on most soils, but a little deeper, 1/2 to 1 inch on sandier soils. Some things on establishment during that first year with the cool season grasses. Um, Very important that we maintain a consistent soil moisture through that germination and early growth phase. Just basically trying to keep in mind that we know the root systems aren't very well established yet, and so we do not want that top 2, 3, 4 inches to dry out too rapidly. In the case of spring seeding, sometime 2,4-D can be used after the 5-leaf development stage for broadleaf weed control. But again, if we do have legumes as part of that mix, that would be a problem. Would not be able to use something like 2,4-D. The avoiding fall grazing point here, I think is very important, whether it will be a spring seeding and then to a lesser extent for seeding that was done the previous fall. The fall is a very important time for cool season grasses, where they are spending some of their time and energy in rebuilding their root reserves. So if we do some grazing in the fall, make sure that it is that first year, make sure it's just moderate or light grazing. And again, for additional information, you can check out the UNL Extension website, or feel free to contact me at area code 308-696-6710. Thank you.